Welcome to After Credits here on the Intercut podcast channel, where we discuss a new movie, including everything that comes after the credits. I am your co-host, Zachary Shevich, and joining me, he might be the first person to try an interdimensional fruit. It's Arturo Zurita.
This is that movie that if you got a boy who you've ever stayed up till 2 a.m. in the morning with to talk about the most foolish conspiracy theory or thought or connection or coincidence, whatever it is, this is that movie. I'm excited to talk about this one because this is one that you and I were able to catch together early on this year at Sundance when we had our own little private theater when we made it out there to Utah. I know it was one of their first movies to premiere at Sundance.
Yeah, their first movie at Sundance.
That's great. Considering that we've been following a lot of their movies back from The Endless and Resolution, this is like this is the build up to all of that, right?
Yeah.
We've been talking about like where do you fit this in the timeline of how to watch it, and to me personally, this is the movie that is the result of all of the work that they've done together. And I think that the more of the previous movies that you watch of them, the better this movie's going to be.
Absolutely. We are talking about Something in the Dirt, the latest movie, written, directed, starring, and a whole bunch of other stuff by Aaron Moorhead and Justin Benson, who will join us later in this video to talk about their movie. They are a couple guys who have made a habit of making these kind of scrappy little sci-fi movies that take more modest budgets and really stretch the imagination of like what is possible in indie sci-fi films. I think we've really enjoyed a lot of their films in the past. We've talked about Synchronic for sure on Intercut. Mm-hmm. I really like The Endless. I don't know if there's anything from their past that really stunk out to you.
The Endless, easily. That's my probably starting point that I would always recommend people to go see. You catch some little Easter eggs there and how they build the world. Brings also another great one to start with, but they're the definition of making movies with your friends, which eventually ended up becoming their tagline.
Yeah, they got that in the credits for this movie. So yeah, this movie, Something in the Dirt, is about a pair of neighbors who witness something supernatural and then begin to investigate it themselves. And I think one of the things that we both really love about this movie is just that sense of like diving down the rabbit hole, right? Like, a lot of this movie is spent deliberating and theorizing and going back and forth to try and figure out what is going on. It's one of those, it's kind of one of those like guys discover something weird and try to do something with it. But there's just a really fun energy to it, a fun hangout vibe, even when it gets into some more like unsettling kind of disturbing or creepy moments. And I think it's just a really great mix of genres in this kind of lo-fi sci-fi way.
Definitely. If you're a fan of Primer, Under the Silver Lake, a lot of these movies where you go in and you start noticing little symbols and stuff around you, then this is definitely one of those to add. It uses California beautifully. It had me going around Chicago noticing different signs in different places as well. And I think it's definitely worth catching on a rewatch because there's a lot of little things, especially from a narrative point of view, from a filmmaking, breaking the fourth wall perspective, that they're able to like really hone in on after you've seen the movie once through. But again, I would highly recommend, if you haven't seen any of the previous ones, to check those out as you lead into this one, because it's going to be out on VOD, and I think it's definitely worth catching there, again, so you can rewatch it multiple times. But if you do have a chance to catch it, like as an early matinee or such, I would. That's how we caught it, technically.
Yeah.
Early matinee in our own little Sundance theater. I think this still delivers on that front.
Yeah, this is definitely one that I would say is worth going out to the theater for. It's a lot of fun and really, really kind of intriguing. Like, I think it's good brain food because it makes you really think and try to figure out what's going on. But it's also, going to be available at home for VOD, or I think it is already. So, yeah, it's definitely one that we'd recommend. And it's one that we definitely we're thinking a lot about since we saw it at Sundance. It's been one that I've been tossing over in my head, and we were really excited when we were approached with the opportunity to talk to Benson and Moorhead about this movie and mine their brains for how they make the choices they do and how they present this story. So we had a whole bunch of questions for them. I know, Art, you have been on them for a while, and you wanted to ask them about Sundance and Easter eggs and all that. I mean, it's a movie that merits diving into the details of. So we talked to them with complete spoilers and all. It was a really cool discussion. Yeah, I mean, what are some things that you wanted to find out from our interview?
Well, you'll see in a little bit all the questions that we asked. So if you haven't seen it, definitely full spoilers. But this is one where, again, as a broken record, there's a lot of their filmography that I think really leads up into this movie. That as a viewer, you almost feel like you've been seeing them building to this point. The one thing that I definitely go in with it is that they're at that cross point where they're like in the studio space now. You know, they're making these Marvel projects. Some of you may know them from the Moon Knight series that they directed a couple of episodes for. And I remember hearing them say that their approach to this movie was that in the middle of the pandemic, realizing like, oh, can we make something else? So we have to wait for the funding or the people or the idea or anything. They thought back to themselves, 10, 15 years ago, and said we would scoff at ourselves if we were listening to ourselves today. Get the camera and let's film. And
Absolutely.
With them being in front of the camera, it's always one of them here, one of them behind, and flip-flopping. And it's motivational.
And that can-do energy, I think, really seeps into the movie. It is a movie that is very much about, like, doing it yourself, making it happen, even if you've only got yourself and a buddy or maybe a couple friends around you. So that ethos really, it's what they make their movies by. It's what this movie really feels like, and I think it really pays off. We really enjoyed the film, and we really enjoyed our conversation with Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead. So let's hear a bit more from the guys who made Something in the Dirt.
I just want to say congrats, first of all, because we were able to catch it at Sundance. Sundance is like one of the biggest film festivals for us because that's the first place that we were able to go to. And seeing that you guys got accepted, and it's been time since that festival. I know that it was probably like a huge wave coming in. Now that you've had time to like kind of wallow it out, how has the virtual release been? How's it been looking back at being able to be at Sundance, and like how have things changed with this rollout as opposed to a lot of the other ones?
It's funny, like how's it been different? It was definitely different having a virtual premiere. Was definitely a lot different than a premiere in a theater. It was kind of wild in terms of like we had only ever been rejected. Like I mean, I think every filmmaker submits to Sundance. We had only ever gotten the rejection letter, so it was pretty surreal. Just on movie number 5, having the opportunity to screen there was pretty amazing.
Doesn't it feel like cosmically, like when you want something really bad, that's when you don't get it, but once you finally just said, well, I guess I'm never gonna get it, that's when it suddenly works. You know, it's so upsetting to be human. But what was really cool about the Sundance virtual premiere was just our experience of the actual day, because we invited our whole crew over, but the crew had seen the movie. So we didn't watch the movie because there's no reason to stream the movie that everyone had already seen. We instead just hung out and we never really got to hang out on set together because of COVID protocols. And so we're able to hang out in our courtyard, and then we did a Q&A together, and then we just went out to some bars, and it was a really lovely low-key experience for something where our emotions were sailing so high.
Pretty cool.
Yeah. And the only reason it took so darn long to release from Sundance till now is because we went off and worked on something for 6 months in between. And there's no cast or anything, we kind of were the only people to promote the movie. And if we're not available, then there's no promotion. So yeah.
That makes sense. Well, congrats, guys.
Yeah. We were both really excited when we got to see it at Sundance. I think it's one of the best movies that we definitely saw out there. I also feel like with a lot of your movies, you're able to include like a lot of explanation while still maintaining a sense of mystery to the film. This film in particular feels like the consequence of a lot of Wikipedia rabbit hole diving. And I feel like that also brings out a lot of the humor in the film. I think this is probably the funniest film of yours that I've seen. What inspired you to make this movie so dense with different concepts, even some that kind of end up being more like red herrings?
Yeah, well, I think what it was is this is actually in some ways an omnibus film of our graveyard of failed pitches for the last 10 years, where we would be asked to come and pitch on, for example, a haunted house movie franchise. We'd be asked that for almost every franchise, just like, oh, do you guys want to come in and pitch, see what we can do? And they were always so left of center that we might as well have just not done it. That we just wanted to give it a good shot. And but there was all these ideas that we thought were pretty good. They were just very left of center. And we found via, the decision to make this film and the construct of what this film is, this kind of, exploration into the unknown, that we were able to use every single one of those, not every single one, sorry, that the initial vomit draft, not draft of it, of the document that guided the film had every single one of the ideas. And then we actually pruned it down to something vaguely cohesive, believe it or not.
That's pretty cool.
So how do you navigate that balance then of like stuffing it with all this information and not like necessarily over explaining any of your ideas?
Well, it's interesting because on the prior movies we've done, there's obviously more of a sincerity to the mythology being weaved into the film.
Right.
The third act relies on the science fiction horror component landing with a certain amount of clarity for it all to pull together. And on this one, we had decided straight out the gate that it was like, well, something definitely happened for these guys, and it would be nice just to do something where truly the character arcs take complete prominence over the third act, as opposed to being kind of tied to trying to explain a super sincere sci-fi horror premise to a T, or else nothing works. It was nice to do a film where that is not the case, or that really it's like, you glimpse the tip of the iceberg at the beginning of the movie. The iceberg was real, but your main characters literally didn't know it was an iceberg.
Would you say that we've been trying for probably since Arca to make something where we could satisfy the audience, and yet the point would be to be comfortable with the unknown, and that we would kind of make a promise early on, like, hey, we're not going to answer this. This isn't about that. Because there are movies that are super frustrating where they say, oh, it could be anything. And that's just kind of, I feel like if you make a promise to the audience via little cues that that's not what this movie is going to be about, then hopefully nobody would be dissatisfied at the lack of resolution in what the sci-fi mystery is. And we wanted to do that for years because there's a thematic reason, is that these people should probably get comfortable with the unknown, because in this case, they led them to some pretty dark places. Are you doing spoilers?
Hell yeah.
Yeah, and I'm
if y'all
happy
are
to do
okay with it,
spoilers.
yeah, we love spoilers. Especially for your guys' movies. I think it's like the best way to talk about them.
There's something very interesting about how in real life, most people probably have experiences that, that the experiences are ultimately subjective and they're ultimately personal experiences. And you can't prove whether something outside what regard as scientific thought happened, or just a general ethos of materialism, or whatever it is. You can't prove anything outside that, but it can still be personal to you. You can still believe it happened. You can believe in the supernatural, all those things. And I think that's probably the experience that most people have in life, where it's like, oh, I can't prove it, but I feel like I've had things happen. There's something about a movie that can be analogous to that, to real life, that I think was a story that was really appealing to us to tell. That is to say that you don't get to the end of the movie and you go, I guess it was all psychological. I guess it was just completely in their heads. Some of it was clearly. They clearly were wrong about a lot of things, but you still feel like something was there. And there's something that gives the thrill of a sense of dread and eeriness with that is not only meaningful to being analogous to real life, but it's also something quite thrilling.
Awesome.
Totally. I feel like that's a great place to sort of like segue to talking about the visual language of the film, because I thought it's really interesting how it kind of blends what we feel like is maybe more of like an objective view, although maybe it's just seemingly objective, with then the more subjective views of the characters and what they're choosing to film and choosing to show, as well as like you have those documentary style cutaways. Can you talk a bit about choosing to communicate character through these cinematography choices, and also if that sort of main camera is maybe meant to be a bit more subjective than it would seem on first glance?
That's an incredible question, and we actually haven't been asked it before. And buckle up, because it's just going to take us to the end of this podcast to answer it.
I'm very ready for it.
Well, I guess historically, we shoot all of our movies with a very similar ethos, in a way that I don't believe we were able to do on Something in the Dirt, and I'll get into that, which is that the camera is subjective and it's alive, and it has its own volition and will, but it is not a human. And so that's why it's able to go anywhere, but it has this kind of particular, its own interest, and it kind of seems to know where the story's going in a way and leads us in that way. And the reason we didn't do that on Something in the Dirt and couldn't do that on Something in the Dirt, luckily thematically it works very, very well, because this isn't a naturalistic. This isn't meant to be a naturalistic narrative. It is meant to be something that sort of is supposed to exist in our real world, akin to House of Leaves. And it's supposed to use these documentary style things that we haven't ever completely embraced. And then on a production level, there was an in-person crew of myself, Justin, and Dave, our producer. So if Justin was on camera, I was holding the camera, so we couldn't have a lot of like two shots. There were wide shots, but that we'd shoot for the scene. This is my dog Rooster, by the way. I don't know if you're doing visuals. But
yeah, we are.
Beautiful.
I'll always appreciate a dog cameo.
That's
great.
That's the thumbnail right there.
Yeah. If you see us, our eye line wandering off, it's because he's doing something. So that is why, like, the main camera of the film is. Do you want to get into the character subjective cameras and the cutaways?
Yeah. So something we had talked about from early on was that in the process of these guys deciding to try to document the supernatural, that they would each get their own cameras, and these cameras would be distinctly different images so that the viewer would be able to track whose point of view it was in those exact moments. And so my character Levi, he purchases a standard def Panasonic DVX 100 from a thrift store that it's going to look different because it's standard def. And then Aaron's character has a HD SLR who he's always shooting with, and that in moments of highly emotional moments, you would see these characters being expressed through what they're doing with those cameras. It comes mostly into play in the third act, sort of big emotional argument blowout between the two of them. But we tried to weave it in wherever we could, and that was a lot of fun. And it also, anytime you're cutting between wildly different camera formats, it buys you a little bit in terms of pacing in a weird kind of a way. Like, it feels like the scenes are going faster just by virtue of just literally cutting between different formats.
Yeah. And actually on that same note, we were doing an interview a few weeks ago, and someone made us realize this other format of doing cutaways to stock footage and public domain footage and our childhoods and all of this. We have a lot of deep theory for why it is the way it is, and it actually evolves through the movie. But somebody said something really interesting, is that that it adds authenticity to what they're saying. It's almost like showing visual evidence rather than vocal testimony. And that was something that, believe it or not, the cutaways, it was always a documentary, but the cutaways were not always in the film. The cutaways were something that came during rehearsal. And started as an offhand comment. It's like, what if right here we cut away to something? We ended up really having to do that for the whole film, creating something like 300 additional shots to be sourced. But it was also incredibly exciting and fun. but also, oh my God, such a bang your head against the wall sort of thing. And but the reason for that originally was meant to be something that we just thought it would be funny, especially if it contrasted with what we were saying. One of our favorite cutaways is something that was added late in the edit, but John says something like, "Oh yeah, the door was wide open, so I just walked in," and it cuts to like this bolt cutter clearly snapping off a lock. You know, or whenever Levi's talking about like a lobster the size of Danny DeVito, and we just go to this like super wide angle gonzo lens of a lobster. Really,
you get a lot of the humor that way. Those cutaways.
Yeah. And those moments would have always been funny, but it is so nice to be able to back them up. Or blatant exaggeration, you know, like saying like, "Oh, a meteorite struck here," and then cutting to like a nuclear bomb going off on Earth. These things were just wildly fun. I kind of felt like a child looking for like, what's the silliest way to execute this moment and not completely jump tone.
Yeah, I like how some of the characters that y'all interview in the movie even call that out. They're like, "Why are you guys doing the reenactions?"
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was a controversial, not controversial. What'd you say? It was a careful line.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That whole some of those layers of especially getting into like how much has been recreated and all of that was always kind of like just a scary thing to put into your movie. Someone has probably done it before and we're just not super aware of it. But for us, it was like, oh wow, this is like, it was kind of a scary thing to do creatively, and so much so that we would always like think about like, oh well, like could we, is this an easy trim? But now it's kind of like, now with the finished film, I think oftentimes for people, it's almost like even if you hate the movie, it's a reason for it to exist. Like where it's like, oh, there's some like level of maybe innovation happening.
Yeah. I think you're always, especially in the sci-fi realm, right on the razor's edge of something that's like pretty cool and the stupidest thing that's ever happened. And that's the most exciting place to be. And by the way, sometimes you fall into one, sometimes you fall into the other. But I feel like the fact that they're playing themselves in their recreations, or that the film's been edited by 7 different people, including mystery people and off-camera people and all that, always had the potential to be the world's biggest eye roll. And I'm sure some people also feel that way about the film. But we now with the finished product feel like it's an indelible part of the film. It's so exciting, I guess, for us.
Nice.
Yeah, definitely agree. Art, did you want to ask about the Easter eggs?
I'm a huge nerd when it comes to Easter eggs, and you guys, like, I don't know, you just kill it. Since the beginning, I've been following, I see a little red petals in any one of y'all's movies. I know that there's something there to look out for. And I remember catching The Endless and catching a lot of those things. And I see some things that look like The Endless in this movie, and some references to the past stuff that have been throughout. And I'm curious, especially with all the projects that y'all said you've pitched, and a lot of people like jumping up to bigger franchise. I know y'all have had the opportunity to do so. Do you see that as being a through line that you're going to continue in your movies? That kind of like Easter egg side story? Do you see that becoming its own story? Maybe instead of making a franchise, you guys will revisit one of your older movies? Like, is that something you've thought about with a lot of that backstory, almost lore that you've built?
Yeah, to expand a universe.
Yeah. I mean, probably nearly 100% sure we'll go more explicitly back into that universe and those characters specifically. It's probably almost no doubt. I guess just what form that takes is the question, whether we do it as another one of our indie films, or if we do it as a TV show or something. But yeah, it's something we constantly talk about. There's something really special that happens when you make something, like, for example, when we made Resolution, and then you keep thinking about those characters over many years, and you go back and you revisit the story. And if you can just get out of your mind the idea of what a sequel is, just forget that. Who cares about that? It doesn't matter. But if you can just use it as creative juice, just to tell a better story with a bigger backstory, these more fleshed out characters, that even if a viewer comes into a movie that's 3 or 4 in chronology, but they feel a big backstory. And as long as I can still follow the movie and it doesn't require complicated plot elements to get you there, there can be something really special about the process of making it, the creative process, coming with ideas for it, of just expressing where those characters are at now after, 5-10 years of gestation is a very special thing. But again, always without falling into the pit of being like, we're making a sequel, so what do sequels do? And not even being meta about it. Like, just forget that, get that out of your head. It's funny, we have so many forms of media that do that, and they are not sequels. A TV show is serialized typically, right? Like, we understand what these things are, but there's something about doing something that is both serialized and also doesn't require the viewer knows what came before, and using that as a strength. It's very exciting.
There was something that Justin said to me when he was working on something with some familiar characters from the Endless, where he goes, he's halfway through writing a scene with them, and he's like, in a video game when you forget to pause, and so your character just kind of standing there, like lightly bouncing up and down. These two characters just staring at each other with nothing to say, just kind of like bouncing up and down, waiting to be written. It feels that way when they're that lived in.
Right.
A beautiful way to put it.
Yeah, I love that. The film's credits have a dedication to making movies with your friends, which when we caught the film for the first time, we were a little worried that that's like it's marking the end of some kind of chapter or something. I know you guys started a production
Goodbye,
company.
making movies with friends. That's hilarious. That's funny.
Well, I mean, so you have your new production company, right? Rustic Films. I was wondering, do you think you'll continue to make movies at least in this style, or are you really more excited by expanding your scope in a way?
Oh no, no. The making movies with friends is a recommitment to the ethos for sure. Right. We're Rustic Films as a production company, and Justin and I as directors particularly. That is just something that we just keep on needing to prove to ourselves, and I think we've proven it for our final time. That it's the best way to make movies is just gather your friends together and make one. It doesn't have to be tiny, but there. It is just a completely different experience to go and look for somebody that's like more talented or something than someone you're believing that your friends are, when you realize your friends are actually the most talented people you know, because on top of that, they can read you. They know what you like. You know what they like. You can work with each other. There's a shorthand. You shoot shorter days. You shoot for shorter hours. Your meetings are shorter, and everybody's working to the same goal because you have the same taste because you're friends, and that's absolutely what we want to keep on doing. It's not just the movie. Like, he's wearing this Rustic Films shirt. We sell merchandise on our website that says like "Make movies with friends." Like, it is a very real ethos that we will forever be carrying forward.
That's awesome. We appreciate you guys, and the movie was fantastic. Every time we go to a festival, if we see a Benson Moorhead film, we're adding it to the schedule. So that'll continue happening, and can't wait to see you guys continue making movies with friends.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
If I could wrap up with one final quick thing, just since we're approaching the end of the year, is there anything you saw this year that particularly inspired you guys?
Oh yeah, I'll just get one right out because it leapt into my head. I came a little late to the Drive My Car party.
Oh my god! What an amazing film!
Gosh, that movie wrecked me. One of the rarest things where I thought, oh, I could just rewatch this movie immediately, even though it's slow and 3 hours long and quiet.
Absolutely.
I love it. Yeah.
It's like meditative. It's beautiful.
Yeah. It's hard to make movies that say so much about being a human while the movie doesn't actually fit. Like, there's very little dialogue in the movie. It doesn't say that much, Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I can't stop thinking about the last season of Better Call Saul. I think that whole like all of Breaking Bad, but especially Better Call Saul, it's like, oh, it is cinema. It's cinema. Like, it's beautifully shot. It's got bold editing, bold storytelling. And it's hard. I think that it's funny, like, Breaking Bad is obviously so beloved. But I find myself thinking about Better Call Saul as like oddly a thing that's just like, I think maybe I relate with it more. because like I think in filmmaking you always feel like Saul sometimes.
Yeah.
Like you're like constantly like trying like
An
you have
Ed
to
Wood.
switch between going into pitching mode and trying to be entertaining to people and like everything feels like it's like if you finish a movie you feel like you kind of like we're like it's like I don't know if anyone finishes an indie film without being a con artist.
Yeah. Exactly. I was thinking the exact same thing. It's like I pulled off that caper and nobody's
Right.
there.
Yeah, the Walter White's genius is maybe a little too high to relate to, but we can all envision ourselves as Saul sometimes.
Yeah. There's also a film on the festival circuit. There's a film on the festival circuit right now called From Beyond, and by Frederick Hanna. And if it's a short, it's I think 13 minutes long, but worth like buying a ticket to a shorts block to see, where it's imagine if District 9 were dead serious, not a single joke, and was fully mixed media, and the alien was more incomprehensible, was more like a mold or something like that. And so you get to see from a billion different forms of media how humanity responds to like this weird alien incursion of some kind that doesn't really look or feel like any other alien incursion that you can imagine. And it's just a work of brilliance. And I just want to draw some attention to a little indie project before we sign off, talking about the Oscar winner and the Emmy winner.
From Beyond.
Yeah,
Okay.
Sounds amazing. Yeah, got to put that on our radar. Thanks so much, guys. I really, really appreciate getting to talk about this movie.
Yeah. Thank you.
It's great.
And goodbye to the dog.
Yeah.
Oh, he doesn't want it. Nope, he's too excited.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Wait, here we go.
More important things to do.
Come on, say goodbye, my friends. Got this. No, I was just confused.
Nice. He's
All
really
right.
lost interest.
Take care, guys.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Take care.